And now the film switches gears, and it's almost a film of two halves, with the first half being an action-packed chase-heavy act with Bond putting clues together and chasing down his leads, and the second half being a very human story of two people falling in love played against the mother of all poker games. While travelling to Montenegro, Bond meets Vesper on the train. Trains have been used in Bond films before, almost always in an action scene, but they're always associated with romance and the meeting of lovers. It's a great scene as Bond and Vesper square off, both attempting to break each other down. Eva Green is exceptional in the role, and from a personal opinion, not only is she incredibly beautiful, but I love how the more womanly side of her is slowly introduced. She arrives in a suit with her hair tied back and presents a very business-heavy attitude. Later we see her without makeup on and in a dressing gown, and when she finally appears in her dress, it's not made a big deal out of like the Jinx Halle Berry or the Ursula Andress Honey Rider intros. It's treated like a normal entrance of a character and just allows her appearance and her performance to be the full focus, and god damn if she doesn't look incredible. Craig and Green have a sparkling chemistry that grows nicely through the film, and you really buy into the idea that these two are in love.
You want to do what to me?
You've lost me completely.
You just said you can't wait to get me back to the room. Come on.
The initial beginning of the relationship is well written and genuinely funny as both attempt to one-up the other, with Bond usually coming out the loser. A favourite moment for me is during the poker game when Vesper makes her entrance. Bond attempts to undermine her a tad.
Weren't you supposed to enter so the others could see you?
Was I? Forgive me. Good luck, darling.
Only for her to ham up the performance and then wiggle her ass to distract the table, but it ends up distracting Bond the most.
Monsieur Bond? Oh, I'm sorry, what was the bet? 100,000?
You could claim this undermines women, but in this case, she knows exactly what she's doing, and Craig's reaction sells it. This does bring up another part of the film I've heard people criticise when it comes to Craig's performance. In this case, that he's often gotten the better of, and the argument being that no one should ever get the better of Bond. To counter this, I direct people to watch From Russia with Love, where for over 3/4 of the film, Bond is manipulated and shadowed by a Spectre agent, and he is none the wiser for it. In Goldfinger, he spends half the film as a prisoner, and in Live and Let Die, he's repeatedly outwitted and tricked by Kananga and his men. So what I'm saying is, Bond being one-upped is nothing new for a Bond film. There's also a nice little nod to Moneypenny in here.
I'm the money.
Every penny of it.
And more hints about Bond's ego.
He knows you're reckless.
And arriving at the hotel, Bond finally gets his official Aston Martin, which foreshadows the defibrillator, and a quick little nod, and again, something I like about the film, it doesn't dwell on it. It's there for a moment, and then it's gone, and you can forget about it. Bond and Vesper head off for a meeting with their contact Mathis, and while Mathis' role is primarily there to explain the plot and be the voice of the audience, Giancarlo has such a way with his delivery, you don't even notice.
I think your odds are improving, Mr. Bond.
Later that evening, in another beat of the relationship, we get more sparring from Vesper and Bond, with Bond undermining her and her appearance, only for Vesper, again, to one-up him by presenting him with his dinner jacket.
It's tailored.
I sized you up the moment we met.
And we get the first appearance of Bond in his tuxedo, and I love the way Craig plays this, as Bond is quite clearly attracted to himself, something Vesper is all too aware of. Heading off to the hotel, we get our first face-to-face meeting between Bond and Le Chiffre, and pretty much disbands the cover story of Bond being called Beach.
Welcome, Mr. Beach. Or is that Bond? I'm a little confused.
And then the film settles into this deliciously slow build in a poker tournament. There's no dynamic camera angles or quick cutting, everything is through reactions and everything is used to enhance the story. I can only imagine the horror it must have been to prep this kind of scene, knowing that you're going to devote over half an hour of screen time to a poker game. I mean, can you imagine Michael Bay directing a scene like this? You'd have so many quick camera angles and cuts and international stereotypes spouting semi-racist dialogue that you'd want the whole room to get nuked by the end of it. Bond bluffs to discover Le Chiffre's tell, which, importantly, he informs both Vesper and Mathis.
It was worth it to discover his talent.
What do you mean?
The twitch he has to hide when he bluffs.
To keep the pacing up, as well as a chance to relieve some of the tension and allow the characters to breathe, the filmmakers played smart and break up the poker playing, in a sense splitting it into 3 rounds. So think of this as round 1, with the characters of Bond and Le Chiffre sizing each other up. I like the simple staging of having Bond and Le Chiffre sitting opposite each other, because earlier in the film, Bond states,
Then you'll also know that in poker you never play your hand. You play the man across from you.
And everyone knows it's going to come down to Le Chiffre and Bond, so it's natural to have them sitting opposite each other and allows for some tight framing. Calling for a break, Bond slips a tracker into Le Chiffre's inhaler, and upon returning to his room, Le Chiffre is accosted by Urbano, who demands to know where his money is.
I'm sorry.
Where is my money?
Not only is the jump here surprising, the scene has a genuine air of tension and suspense. Le Chiffre as is his ice cool persona, doesn't flinch as Vanelka is threatened, and right up until the last moment, you actually believe Urbano could actually remove her arm. Leaving the room, Urbano and his associate discover Bond has been listening in, and this leads to a very intense fight sequence on the stairwell, with Urbano swinging his machete like a man possessed. Again, similar to the opening kill, this is a very messy death. And the aftermath is, as I've stated, my favourite moment of the film. I would say I'm in two minds about the handling of Vesper's character in this scene though. The sequence of her attempting to get away from what she's seeing feels very real, but the moment of her coming back to help Bond feels a little too forced for me. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for women empowerment, but I felt personally that this was put here just to keep her active, while a much more human reaction would have been for her to back away in fear. Vesper isn't a trained killer. She's a spy, yeah, but she isn't used to this kind of scene, and her initial reaction is the more human reaction. Saying that, this does lead to the first real connection between Bond and Vesper as she tries to deal with having seen a dead body.
It's like there's blood on my hands. It's not coming off.
The scene with Vesper and Bond in the shower is wonderfully performed and acted, and what I love most about it is it's all filmed in one take. Many films have that iconic scene or image that they can use in trailers or on promotional art, and for me, that's this scene. And you see Bond's cold demeanour start to thaw as he comforts her. The next morning, hints are dropped of Bond's feelings for Vesper growing while we discover what Mathis did with the bodies in a rather humorous, if slightly morbid scene. Again, it's down to the performance that Mathis is so memorable, because all he's really there to do is either to push plot or explain the scene to the audience. What makes him effective is that 9 times out of 10 he manages to push it without actually making it seem obvious. An example of this being later in the movie when he explains the poker scene to Vesper. In this situation, Vesper isn't aware of the rules of poker, so Vesper is the audience at this point.
115 million in the pot.
It works because both the audience and Vesper learn this information together. Now compare this to how exposition was written in Avatar. Here you have Parker explaining to Grace the purpose of the Avatar program, what they're there for, and the situation. This scene feels completely unnatural to me because Grace already knows all this information as she's been on the planet the whole time. The whole sequence is here to let the audience know of the situation, but it would have been much more better served and organic to have Parker deliver this speech to Jake, as Jake is us. Jake is the audience. He's the stranger to this world and discovering all this information for the first time. Round 2 of the poker tournament is almost like the second act of a play, the act where the hero fails or falters, and indeed this is where Bond's ego gets the better of him. Again, all through subtle performance and looks, we see Bond's confidence. This, though, is a moment where I really could have done without Mathis explaining the scene.
Look, it's the tell. He's bluffing.
As by now, I was completely sucked in and could understand what was happening. This is one of the few times where the movie has to stop and explain the scene to the audience, and for me, it wasn't really needed and just felt forced. Going all in, Bond loses and Vesper refuses to buy him back in, noting that Bond doesn't want back in to stop Le Chiffre, but because Le Chiffre beat him and his ego can't take it.
Sorry.
Sorry? Sorry? Why don't you try putting that in a sentence, like maybe, sorry Le Chiffre's gonna win, continue funding terror and killing innocent people. That kind of sorry?
You lost because of your ego, and that same ego can't take it. That's what this is about.
This is where Craig is especially good. We rarely, if ever, see Bond beaten, and here he's desperate and doesn't know how to handle it. Thanks to the writing from the first act onwards, it's established what a problem this is for him to let go of a situation and accept defeat. The Bond of Dr. No onwards almost never suffered defeat, and if he ever did, he would always get out of it just as soon as he'd faced it. Ego bruised and humiliated, Bond loses all form of cool and attempts to just out and out assassinate Le Chiffre, only to get introduced officially to Felix Leiter, played by Jeffrey Wright, who offers to buy Bond back in on the grounds that the CIA can take Le Chiffre in when he beats him.
And what about the winnings?
Does it look like we need the money?
These days you might. Bond is now back in the game, but from a story perspective, the hero usually has to die or face death in order to be reborn, and while Bond has had a resurgence as far as the poker playing is concerned, he is still the arrogant egomaniac with a chip on his shoulder he's been since the film started. This all changes during the following sequence, as Bond begins to accumulate chips only to be poisoned, and I love the subtlety of the performance from Le Chiffre. He doesn't blink, but Bond, knowing from how he's feeling to Le Chiffre's look, is able to gauge exactly what's happened, and after an attempt to regurgitate the poison, stumbles out to his car and uses the defibrillator in an attempt to revive himself. Yes, it's a handheld defibrillator. It's Bond, just go with it.
Stay calm.
And don't interrupt, because you'll be dead within 2 minutes unless you do exactly what I tell you.
I'm all ears.
And this is the moment where you could say that Bond dies and has his rebirth. Bond is now, as far as the story is concerned, reborn, and now the character can take on this new direction. It's nothing new to film or literature. In Star Wars, Luke ultimately chooses death against going to the dark side and is reborn a Jedi, but the list could go on and on. The close of the sequence does allow for another beat in the relationship of Vesper and Bond and gives some of my favourite moments between them. From Bond asking if Vesper's okay after she's just brought him back to life.
You okay?
Me?
To the conversation before he goes back inside.
We're not seriously going back there.
I wouldn't dream of it.
To the final beat of the sequence that pays off with what could be best described as an actual funny one-liner.
I'm sorry. That last hand nearly killed me.
As the game winds down, we get the now standard face-off in any cinematic poker tournament, with the characters going all in and revealing their hands one by one, with each hand beating the previous. It's cliche, and even though I've seen the same scene before, especially in Maverick, the direction and the music, as well as the acting, all help build up the tension of the scene.
5 and 7 of spades. A straight flush. Monsieur Bond wins.
Bond wins, of course, and in a great Bond-like little moment, he gives the dealer what must be something like $500,000 in chips. I'm probably wrong about the amount, but trust me, it's a lot.
You know, I think a celebration's in order.
You were almost dead an hour ago.
Come on. I'm famished.
And buying out a room so they can have a meal together, what follows is a mirror scene of the train sequence between Bond and Vesper. They're both sitting in the same positions, only now things are lighter and much more romantic. Vesper's in a dress, Bond has relaxed his clothing and is much more open as he's let his guard down, and we get insight into Vesper's past, most notably the charm that she wears around her neck, while Vesper questions Bond about the nature of killing and how it sits with him.
You can switch off so easily, can't you? It doesn't bother you killing those people.
I wouldn't be very good at my job if it did.
The scene is, again, beautifully acted between the two leads as they discover yet more sides to their characters. And yet, through Eva's performance, there's this overhanging feeling that there's more to this woman than we yet know. This is why the film is worth multiple viewings, especially on Vesper's part, as, knowing the ending, you get to go back and watch her reactions to certain scenes and understand the double meaning behind them. Receiving a call from Mathis, Vesper leaves the table and Bond, suspicious of Mathis, follows and observes Vesper being bundled into a car and abducted, which leads to a Bond T-1000 sprint and a car chase. This is a great sequence, and it completely catches the audience off guard and is another way of doing something new for a Bond film. Bond and car chases usually go hand in hand, and it's almost become a cliche in themselves for them to appear in a Bond movie. Bond gets his car, the gadgets get explained, and the audience sits and waits in anticipation until the moment that Bond can use them. It's almost like the film teases this because the chase is on, the music builds, and just when you think you're about to have one, it ends in a pretty spectacular crash, spoiled only because they included it in the damn trailer. Another moment I love about this is after the crash, Bond stays unconscious. Any other Bond from any other film would have been up and about in no time and had probably taken down an army at the same time. Sadly, this is something they ignored in Quantum of Solace, as Bond falls from buildings and even a bloody aeroplane and just walks away from it all without so much as a limp. Le Chiffre sees to it that the gag in Bond's arm is removed and then announces that Mathis is the mole.
I'm afraid your friend Mathis is really my friend Mathis.
And now a quick commercial break.
By the creator of Forget About It. By the co-writer of Panda Q&A. By the guy who calls you an idiot on a regular basis. Be prepared for Tutorial, a brand new show on that guy with the glasses that will not review anything.
What? Fuck that! If Flipper gonna start playing mid-rolls for Panda's videos, there is no way in hell I'm gonna allow mid-rolls in my videos. I mean, granted, it is only 15 seconds, and I can't expect people to sit through a 15-second commercial. I mean, it breaks up the flow of the video, for God's sake. Also, I've got to keep in mind that Blip are a very highly professional organisation, and they are very busy right now promoting their talented producers like Fred, who is producing lots of great content for their website. Taking Bond and Vesper to the docks, this leads to the most famous scene from the book, and a sequence many people didn't think they would ever see in a Bond film, the torture scene. Le Chiffre cuts away the bottom half of a chair and, tying Bond to said chair, has Vesper taken away for further torture and proceeds to slam a rope into his testicles in an attempt to get Bond to give up his code so he can access the money. It might sound morbid, but I love this sequence. There's no music, it's just Bond versus Le Chiffre, with Bond at a considerable disadvantage. It's the most brutal scene in the film, and probably the most brutal scene in any James Bond film. And this is where Bond is quite literally at his most vulnerable. Stripped completely naked and exposed, Craig is just amazing here, managing to show defiance in the face of a no-win scenario, concern for Vesper, a sense of humour.
To the right! To the right! To the right! You are a funny man, Mr. Bond.
And real pain. It also adds to the saying, it's what you don't see that's the most effective. We never see the rope make contact, for which I'm eternally thankful. It's all down to Craig's acting and the sound effects used, which again, aren't over the top, they're just real. A number of people don't like this scene, some for obvious reasons, but taking the male factor out of it for a moment, people don't like it because they feel it makes Bond look weak and that he doesn't get to fight or even kill the main villain. This is something I disagree with because Bond does win this exchange. Despite being in a no-win scenario, he still refuses to give Le Chiffre what he wants. This is also where Le Chiffre seals his place as a worthy villain. His loss of temper while remaining in control, his smile back to Bond when he realises Bond isn't going to give him the code.
You really aren't going to tell me, are you?
And just as Le Chiffre is about to castrate Bond, Mr. White arrives, kills Le Chiffre, as well as Le Chiffre's men. I'll admit, on first watching this, I was not only completely caught off guard by what had just happened, but I didn't know where the film was going to be going next. Was the film over? The bad guy was dead after all. This is me coming from watching every Bond film every year for as long as I can remember. 7 times out of 10, the bad guy dies and the film ends. Or maybe they have a slight epilogue where Bond finishes off a secondary villain. But this, going with the book and the new structure of Bond in general, was not the end. This story isn't about Bond beating Le Chiffre. It's about Bond becoming James Bond. And as of this moment, that still hasn't happened. We get to see Bond recovering, getting Mathis arrested, and he and Vesper consummate the relationship. I guess he's feeling better. But the biggest step Bond takes here is his lack of trust and his only wishing to work alone.
Remember I told you about Le Chiffre's tell? Well, Mathis told Le Chiffre. That's how he wiped me out. I thought he had my back. But there you go. Listen to that.
Bond pledges his entire life to Vesper and that he's going to give up everything for her, and we get the slightly surreal moment of Bond handing in his resignation via email, but clear hints are dropped that Vesper has another agenda, from a reaction to Bond's words while he's recovering, to her sighting a man while they sail around Venice. Vesper leaves Bond to collect some money, only through a phone call Bond discovers she has other plans and has withdrawn the entire amount of his winnings from the poker game. Bond stalks Vesper through the streets of Venice, and I can't be the only person to note a filmic connection to this film and the film Don't Look Now. Red clothing, streets of Venice, yes, no? At least Vesper isn't a killer dwarf. Looking back, Vesper knows she's going to betray him and knows she's going to her death, but she's orchestrated enough clues so that Bond will be able to find the person responsible when this happens. Craig plays the realization of betrayal wonderfully. Upon first realizing what's happened, you can see the hurt and the heartbreak, followed by the anger, and as he stalks the streets, you can just see him getting his game face on. He coldly executes a henchman as he walks along, and once discovered, shows his current feelings for Vesper.
I'll kill!
Allow me.
And this leads to another shootout in a warehouse apartment complex type building, which slowly sinks into the water as they shoot out the foundations. Personally, I feel the complex crash is a tad overkill when compared to the rest of the film, but like the embassy scene from the beginning of the film, it's redeemed somewhat by its ending. Having dispatched all of the associates, Bond attempts to free Vesper from the elevator, and in another stunning sequence performed without words save for 3,
I'm sorry, James.
Bond and Vesper stare at each other before Vesper locks the elevator, which plunges into the water. And even though Bond follows, she commits suicide in a heartbreaking and scarily realistic depiction of drowning. It's made all the more harrowing as she takes his hand and gently strokes it across her face before opening her lungs and drowning herself, while Bond struggles frantically to get to her. The sad thing is, she has to die for Bond to become the man we know, but damn it if I can't hate the filmmakers for actually going through with it and killing her. Something I do like is the scene of George Lazenby cradling his wife in his arms. It's such a powerful image, the filmmakers would be foolish to try and mimic it by ending the film here, and thankfully they don't. Bond does free Vesper and does try to save her, but it's a fruitless effort and she's gone. The real focus then shifts to Mr. White as he leaves with the money, and later we see M filling Bond in a little more on Vesper's backstory.
She had a boyfriend, a French Algerian. They were very much in love. He was kidnapped by the organization behind Le Chiffre, and they blackmailed her, threatening to kill him unless she cooperated.
And while Bond, even though Vesper's betrayal means Mathis is cleared, refuses to believe he's innocent, proving he now trusts no one, and his cold attitude to the people he works with and the women he'll meet is sealed.
Job's done. The bitch is dead.
M, as she did earlier, attempts to appeal to Bond as a parent would a son, and rationalise Vesper's actions to prove Vesper really did love Bond, which proves true. We as an audience know this due to Vesper's reactions to scenes shown earlier in the film, showing she had become emotionally compromised in her role as treasury and spy. But the movie shows her feelings in a far simpler way. Going through her belongings, Bond discovers a number of trinkets she had kept through their time together, which is something you would do with someone you love. And as well as this, finds a message on her phone, possibly the message she sent while she was in the room with him, which leads Bond to the mysterious Mr. White. And the two finally meet, with Bond introducing himself.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
And on that iconic line, we finally get the full James Bond score, showing to the audience he is now James Bond. And there you have Casino Royale. Not perfect by a long shot, but it did what it needed to do. It brought back a classic and well-loved character, and did what few reboots managed to do. It reinvented him and showed you don't need insane gadgets to make a James Bond film work. This wasn't about remaking an old film just for the sake of it. This brought Bond bang up to date with a more raw edge. A Bond you would take seriously and could view as a man who could very easily go the other way and become a villain if he lost his moral compass. It dropped hints of a bigger story, a bigger villain, left many questions and left me wanting more. Sadly, we got more. Quantum of Solace, and the less said about that, the better. With Skyfall due out later this year, I'm just hoping it goes back to the more human side of Bond that was pretty much perfected here. Starting next month will be my James Bond month, where I'm going to take a look at every single one of the James Bond films, bar Casino Royale. Because if you sat through this, I don't really have anything more to say about it. Following that is going to be the start of my Saw retrospective, which is going to be 8 parts long. And after I finish the Saw retrospective, I'm going to look at every single one of the anniversary specials from this website. No, not Blip, that guy with the glasses. I can replace you, you know.
Oh my.